Hello, everyone. Jeff here with a taste for whiskey, and I got to tell you, I'm really excited about everything we're getting ready to do for you today. And first and foremost, I got to just tell you, we are whiskey and bourbon enthusiasts. We love. That's why we call ourselves a taste for whiskey. Is we really like all whiskeys.
All of them.
I mean, we love Scotch and rye and bourbon, and now we're getting ready to talk to you a little bit about Irish whiskey, and we got Chef here who really likes to cook and. He's getting into whiskey. But what we're not is videographers. So I want to thank Bryan Waters today for just coming out and volunteering his time to provide us with a much better look and feel and a more professional look as opposed to some of the things that we're doing. And, we always say it's a one take and go because I can't edit. We don't come from the video world. So it's like, guys, we can't mess this up. We got to go.
Dogs barking. You get whatever you shows get whatever. Up. Right.
So Bryan, thank you so much for helping us out and volunteering your time for this. We thank you so much. And really to be able to present to our folks that's out there watching is our perfect pairing. And when we talk about perfect pairing, we really want to provide you with the best information as far as how to pair whiskey and how to pair food.
Yeah. A lot of what we do is, we get a lot of ideas. We start with mostly what does Jason want to cook for us, which is always fantastic, and try to pick something seasonal a little bit to get some ideas from. Jeff has so much knowledge about where all these whiskeys come from and what makes them, what they're made from, the different grains, mash bills, all that stuff. And then we just get a collection of stuff together and find out what works. And a lot of times what we think is going to work, we just completely miss on. And a lot of times we're digging off the shelves and finding things that we really didn't think of to begin with, ends up being one of the finalists. So, let's kind of get into what we picked today.
All right. Well, thank you, Derek. Mm-hmm. So today, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, and we're going to put together to you a nice Irish meal. And I'll have Chef Jason talk to you a little bit more about the Irish meal. But I want to talk to you a little bit about more Irish whiskey. So Derek and I, we've kind of been tasting Irish whiskey, but we really didn't know much about it. We just know what we like.
Yeah.
But some things that we've kind of learned through this process is just to talk to you a little bit about Irish whiskey. So what is it? So it is made from mash of malted and or unmalted barley plus other cereal grains. That's what you have to have. So you have to have a mash of malted barley or unmalted barley, or it can be any other type of cereal grain. A single malt is going to be described as 100% malted barley. So that's going to be your malted barley coming from a single distillery. Then you have the pot still, which is going to be a mix of malted and unmalted barley. So what makes this unmalted barley so different is that it's kiln-dried barley, which kind of allows you to taste more of the grain. So when you get that red breast, they talk a little bit about that shortbread. That's sort of coming from that unmalted barley. And then you have I said the pot still is going to be a mix of the malted and unmalted. Then you've got the grain Irish whiskey. And that's going to be it can't contain no more than 30% of the malted barley with a combination of any other whole unmalted grains. So a lot of stuff here, right, guys?
A lot of information to take in.
So I wanted to read it because Scotland's got its rules. American bourbon, bourbon has its rules, and then you have Irish with its own rules. It doesn't have to be triple distilled, but most of the Irish whiskeys are triple distilled, and what that results in is going to be more of a smoother and higher alcohol spirit. So, which is this challenge that we've had is that when you triple distill, you're actually going to take more of the impurities out, which means more of the flavor. Which creates a little bit more smoothness and a little bit more of the higher alcohol content. Most of the spirits have to be are aged at least 3 years, but again, that's not required to be Irish whiskey. And then it needs to be bottled at a minimum of 80 proof. And so really for this Irish whiskey, one of the things that we found going through this is just the various flavors based off of the barreling. So it can be a used oak barrel. It can be an unused oak barrel. Mm-hmm. So it really, there's no requirements. It just needs to be aged in wood.
Yeah.
Jeff, I have a question.
Yes.
So for a true Irish whiskey, does it have to be distilled in Ireland?
Yes. It does have to be distilled in Ireland for sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So that's the Irish whiskey side of it. But now I kind of talk a little bit about more of our food pairing, and that is this corned beef and cabbage. That is a traditional dish, right?
Well, traditional American Irish dish. So, as most people know, that, corned beef and cabbage, they cook it for St. Patrick's Day, cook it for Irish holidays, but it's not a true Irish dish. If you would go to Ireland, you wouldn't have corned beef and cabbage.
What?
Yeah.
Darn it.
No, it's more of the pork side, bacon and cabbage that's been salt cured and then smoked. And they do a lot of pork dishes, that have, they do some beef dishes, but corned beef and cabbage is Americanized.
Okay.
So, but, the history of corned beef started back in the 1800s, and they took beef, and then the brisket primarily. It's a tougher piece of meat, and they brined it. And what brining means is they took a salt, and more like sodium nitrate, and sodium nitrate is a curing salt, and it's a chemical compound. That's what gives it the pink color. So the reason why they call it corned beef is because the grains of salt were the size of pieces of corn.
Oh,
and
interesting.
so that's why they call it corned beef. So it takes about 5 to 7 days to cure, and they take the salt and cover it, and they brine that beef, and then for 5 to 7 days, and it turns that nice pink color. It penetrates that meat and makes it tender. It breaks down the proteins in the beef.
Man, it looks fantastic.
They add other spices like coriander, mustard seed, peppercorns, red pepper flakes, and they add those flavors. And those are basically pickling spices.
Okay.
And so, when you make corned beef, you're basically pickling. And so after curing it, then you cook it in the liquid. So I went to the next level.
Yes, you did, Chef.
We've noticed that about you.
I actually took some spiced rum and some orange marmalade and mixed it and made more of a brining solution. And when I marinated the beef brisket, I added all those ingredients plus some pickling spices, and it just enhanced the flavor of that brisket. And so then I took it out, and I love leaving the fat on. Some people don't like the fat on the meat, but I left it on. Then I put it under the broiler and browned that meat just because it adds that extra flavor and an extra touch of the corned beef. And then I took the brining solution that I cooked the corned beef in, and I cooked the cabbage, carrots, and onions in as well, just to bring out those flavors. And I think, behind the scenes, we had to taste a lot of Irish whiskey.
We did. We did.
It was rough.
So,
it was rough.
But it was rough, yeah. But I think we found a couple that matched up pretty well, and with the flavor profiles of both, and
we did.
Yeah.
We did. And I will tell you, it was a tough job having to try this corned beef brisket for sure. It was challenging, but in order to do our research, we had to have some samples, and we had to try some various versions. As you can see, we have a few, and this is just a few of what we've went through, because true to what Derek said, what we think isn't always what actually comes out.
No, it's surprising because the writer's tier on the end.
Yes.
As soon as I seen that as one of the finalists, I thought, oh yeah, I'd love that
that Irish whiskey.
And that might be my favorite of that mix up there, but gosh, it didn't work.
No.
It made it taste off.
That's right.
And I think you brought up the point, it made it taste real alcohol. It brought up more alcohol than it did flavors in there. It stood better on its own.
That's right.
the ones we wanted to work did not.
It didn't.
And the ones we didn't think were going to work were the best.
It did. And I'm wondering if you guys are thinking which one is going to work here. We even just for kicks, we even threw in a blue spot thinking, that's got to work. It's cast strength. It's very, very high quality Irish whiskey. And it just did not work. And I am a huge fan of this Black Adder. I just love this. It just screams Irish whiskey. Very, very nice shortbread note, not overly sweet. But boy, when we went in with the comparison and the blending of the corned beef and cabbage, it just did not work. So we're going to go ahead and announce that we were split on this because both of these went really well. And the good news is both of these are going to be readily available. And that is the Tullamore Dew 12-year at a very good price. And then, of course, the Jameson Cask Mates. This is going to be the stout edition. Both of these worked so much better than the others. As a matter of fact, the blend and how it blends well on the palate just works so well.
Well, we thought that with the spiced rum and the orange in the brisket, that the Tullamore Dew over here in the rum
cask, that's correct,
would work perfectly. And actually, you get the alcohol that overpowers everything that you can't taste, and it didn't enhance the flavor or blend well with the food.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing when it comes to food pairing, and what we really want to help you with is, sometimes we want to make sure that what you're drinking actually, is it going to cleanse the palate so that the food is going to taste fresh every single time, sort of like a wine, or is it going to create those flavor explosions where we're going to actually enhance the food or we enhance the whiskey? In this case here, what we're trying to do is create a really good blend on the palate. We're not enhancing the whiskey, and we're not necessarily enhancing the food. We're pulling out the flavors of both and just creating this really nice balance. Would you agree?
I agree. And if you're going to a restaurant or even having this at home, you want to be able to enjoy both. You don't want one to overpower the other. You want to be able to enjoy a drink with your meal. And these two really would be the perfect pair to enjoy with your meal.
I agree. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and kind of get a nose of what you're getting on the Tullamore Dew. So while we're nosing this, talk to you a little bit about Tullamore Dew. It is actually a Middleton distillery. It's actually, so that's sort of a little hint there, because Middleton actually is the home of Powers. They distill for Redbreast. They do the spot whiskey or Irish whiskeys as well as Middleton, very rare, the Patty. And then Tullamore actually was distilled there up until 2014. So with this being a 12-year, we can assume that this is coming out of Middleton. And this is actually a 12-year, so it's a blend of high pot still and malt. So you're going to get that 100% malted barley mixed with the unmaltiness of the pot still and the maltiness of the pot still. And then you're going to get, it's aged between 12 and 15 years. And it's matured in both sherry cask and bourbon cask. So when you think about what we're having here with the corned beef, it really, the flavors you get out of the sherry, the fruitiness and the dried kind of the raisins go well with the spiced rum.
On the sweetness.
Yep, and then you've got the spiciness of the bourbon. Mm-hmm. So what are you getting on the nose, Derek?
Well, I've always struggled with Irish whiskeys because, bourbon and rye is always where I started. Mm-hmm. And when I kind of branch out, I tend to pick out the fact that these are always finished in bourbon casks, right?
Yep.
So that's where I kind of go. Gosh, it doesn't really smell that much Irish whiskey to me right now, to be honest.
You don't get the maltiness.
Not a ton. Shortbread like you talked about earlier.
That comes through, yeah.
And
I'm trying to pick up the sherry, but it's not.
Looking at the color and just the smell, orange comes to me, and citrus. I mean, it really
That's correct, yeah. And I think I do get some of the dried fruits, kind of the sort of the darker fruit notes of like maybe some blueberry, a little bit. I do get that raisin, some plum. Plum is pretty dominant in the sherry finish. But Derek, to your point, that bourbon cask, I get a lot of that, some of that vanilla that comes out that you're going to find in that bourbon.
Yeah.
Well, if you see on the glass, it kind of sticks to the glass a little bit.
That's
What proof are we? 80 proof.
80 proof. Which we also found. What was interesting is the lower on the Irish whiskey when we're pairing with this food with the saltiness of the corned beef. Really, that lower proof is what you need when you're trying to pair with this dish.
And then these two are the lowest proof out of all these. That 80 proof on both of them.
That's exactly right.
Paired well.
Well, let's go in for a taste, guys, first before we go into our food, just to see where this is at. Cheers.
Right, cheers.
Cheers.
So with the 80 proof, not a lot of spiciness, but there is that fruitiness.
Yeah.
It's definitely more fruity on the palate than you're going to get on the nose.
Yeah. Now those orange notes that you talked about are there, and
That's right.
the nose comes out more when I have it on the palate too. It just always does for me.
Well, I think the best thing we always talk about, how do you take your whiskey when you're doing your food, and the best way to do it is go ahead and take a bite of the food, and then kind of use the whiskey to sort of let that kind of cleanse your palate, and that's how you get sort of the best notes on these flavors. So let's go ahead and enjoy this wonderful dish that our chef has graciously made for us. This is a tough job, guys.
When you want to eat the cabbage, the carrot, and the corned beef all together to get the flavor profile of everything.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Why is it that every time you do this, it just gets better and better? Oh my goodness. This is something everybody can make, and it's delicious.
Yes. Wow.
I tell you, it blends so nicely. So on the palate, as when we were getting those fruit notes, what we create is it kind of takes that saltiness down a little bit, but it doesn't really create we don't get no pepper, but it makes that saltiness go down. It enhances sort of that orange that we pick up in the cabbage and the carrots, and that meat, it cleanses that palate so that really I'm ready to go in for another bite.
Oh.
Wow.
It does.
Or another drink.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Usually when there's food and whiskey on the table, my eye jumps straight to the whiskey, and I was like, what do we have? What do we have? But when you show up, I tend to focus on the food a little more.
That's right.
Yeah, just to be able to take the collection or whatever bottles you have in your cabinet, and you've been through them, you've tried them, you enjoy them. And the idea of pairing all this with food is just something that I never really explored that much. But it just makes everything new. It makes every bottle you have new if you can find the right pairing for it.
And it goes back to where wine and food used to be very predominant, and you matched the wine with the food. Then it went to beer and food. And now it's the bourbon or whiskey or whatever you have in the whiskey realm.
That's right.
To go with food now, and it's the thing.
That's right.
Best for last.
That's exactly right. And it's just so how you can really, what we've explained is the explosiveness of the flavors or the counterbalance of the flavors. But this here with Irish whiskey being a little more light, and I really think that triple distillation really has made it a little more challenging. But even with Irish whiskey, even with the more lighter notes, we've still been able to find the perfect pairing.
Yeah, and then I think the lower proof is the kicker here, and with the flavors, the lower proof really makes all the flavors of both the whiskey and the food predominant.
Exactly. So what Derek is pouring right now is we're going to do a bonus round, and that is another great pairing in a bottle that you can find. In the whiskey world, it seems like Irish, Scotch, and bourbon and rye, there are these allocated bottles that you can't find. And what makes this perfect pair so nice is not only are these easy to find, but they're reasonably priced.
Yeah, which is good.
Which is great. So with the Jameson, Jameson is one of the most popular American Irish whiskeys. In other words, this is one of the more popular ones us Americans tend to lean to, and that is the Jameson brand.
What a perfect pair. American Irish dish.
With an American, Americanized, I should say. Americanized.
Right.
So with the Jameson, it's going to be a blend of mash, of malted barley, unmalted barley, and actually maize. So there's going to be some corn in this as far as that's your grain aspect of it. It's aged 4 years, and then it's this one here with this being the cask made, the stout edition. This is actually going to be finished in an Irish craft beer seasoned barrels. So we don't know where it comes from per se, but we know that it's aged in that craft beer, and you got that stout. You get a little bit more of those ale notes, those beer notes that's going to come through. So let's go ahead and nose this and talk a little bit more about the Jameson now.
Maybe this is, finished in beer that was finished in bourbon barrels and then finished in that. Could that be? If they don't tell us, some Goose Island maybe. I don't know.
So actually, you're right. So the the experiment is where Jameson actually sent this distillery the bourbon to age their beer in, and then they sent the beer barrels back to Jameson.
Why not? Why not?
What a great idea!
You are exactly right. So on the nose, what are you getting on this?
So it's darker.
Yes.
The notes are definitely darker.
You guys getting the hops on this? A little bit of the beer hops on this?
Well, now that you say that.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. And I get a little bit of I still get that shortbread, and some vanilla. Actually, the vanilla's coming through on this. And again, for a 4-year Irish whiskey, I mean, the nose is really nice. And look, it sticks.
You're good
nicely.
at this, I'll tell you.
Sticks nicely.
It does. It's a little darker.
So let's go in for the flavor. Let's provide a little flavor here before. I almost prefer this over the Tullamore. Even though that's a 12-year, that is just nice. The stout comes through, the beer, that finish.
Yeah.
It just sort of, it's kind of underneath. So on the front, I pull some of those notes of the vanilla. I get some of that honey, but there's zero spice. And then as it kind of goes to the mid palate, is when I really start to pull out that hops, that beer kind of comes through, which is just a great blend here. Just a nice balance.
I get, like we talked about earlier, coffee.
I forgot about that. Yes,
Derek mentioned it earlier. And you at the end you get that coffee taste, and that's the stout coming out through the whiskey.
That's excellent.
Yeah,
that's excellent. Well, it's gonna be tough, guys, but we need to go in for another bite here and see how this is gonna pair up. That fattiness that's on that. You guys definitely want to leave the fat on that brisket.
Definitely. And char it. Don't let it just sit after you pull it out of the brine after you're cooking it. You have to char that fat to get the flavor, and it renders it down too, which means it kind of just dissipates.
Yeah, so just like before, this brings the coffee out. When I have the food with this, it brings that coffee and those dark kind of flavors out, and it just enhances them. Where the Tullamore was more of those citrusy orange flavors.
Yeah.
And that's why we couldn't make up our mind, is because they both worked, but they both kind of went different directions.
Different flavor profiles.
You're exactly right. And
so I'm so close that whichever one I try last is the one I like the best. So if I was to go back to the other one, then that would be just this much better. I can't make up my mind. They're both great, just different.
I tell you, and Chef, I think it has to do with the marinating in the spiced rum that really kind of pulls out that orange notes, which really works so well with these. And again, with Irish whiskey being a little lighter, a little, that triple distillation, I think that really the lower proof is what you want to go for. So when you're trying to pair with something like this, go for that 80 proof.
Yeah, I think you're not going to go wrong with either one of these. They have different flavor profiles. And if you're going to have a dinner with the corned beef and cabbage, you're not going to go wrong with either one. It depends on what flavors you like. Do you like the stoutiness, the coffeeness, with a little sweetness there? Or do you like the orange notes, the citrus notes that are coming out in the Tullamore? It's whatever you feel like you want to have.
Listen, you don't have to celebrate an American Irish dish on St. Patty's Day, but if you do, you're not going to be disappointed. But I think right now, for me, I'm going to enjoy this today, next week, and the following week.
Sounds good to me.
This is great. Guys, thank you for following us. Again, this is A Taste for Whiskey, and we look forward to bringing so many more pairings and some other great things to you. So, again, cheers.
Cheers.